This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu takes an historic visit to Africa. He remembers the daring raid at Entebbe from 40 years ago and looks forward to the future. Plus, a look at the amazing agricultural innovations Israel is developing to bless the world. And a look at a life-size replica of Noah's Ark. You've got to see it to believe it. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. We're coming to this week with the Israeli Parliament, the Knesset, behind me. It's been fairly quiet this past week because of a 4-day historic visit by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. His visit began with the ceremony commemorating the 40th anniversary of the Israeli raid at Entebbe in Uganda. It's a military raid that has special meaning for the Israeli leader. For the first time in nearly 30 years, a sitting Israeli Prime Minister visited Africa. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with the leaders of 7 African nations.
The historic summit that will be held later today between the leaders of 7 African countries and Israel testifies to the dramatic changes taking place in the relationship between Israel and Africa. Africa is a continent on the rise. Israel looks forward to strengthening ties with all its countries.
The anniversary held special meaning for Netanyahu. His brother Yonatan was the sole Israeli commando killed during the raid. He said civilized nations must rededicate themselves to the spirit of Entebbe, a spirit of daring and resolve, and a spirit as determined as ever to defeat terror.
At Entebbe, international terrorism suffered a stinging defeat. The rescue mission proved that good can prevail over evil, that hope can triumph over evil, over fear. Today, savage terror is once again sweeping the world. We must recognize that the battle against it is indivisible. When terrorism succeeds in one place, it spreads to other places. And when terrorism is defeated anywhere, it is weakened everywhere.
After the ceremony, Netanyahu held a counter-terrorism summit with the 7 African nations. Many are looking to Israel to help them confront radical Islamic terrorism within their countries. As part of his official 4-day visit, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with a group of evangelical Christians in Nairobi, Kenya. He told them that the Jewish state has no better friends than Christians who love and support Israel. The sound of shofars greeted Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He invited the crowd to come to Israel, the land of the Bible.
Those of you who were, come again. Those of you who didn't come first time. You'll visit Jerusalem, visit Nazareth. You'll come to the Sea of Galilee.
He told them a story about a kibbutz that discovered a 2,000-year-old boat.
It's a fishing boat, and they carbon dated it. And it's right at the time of Jesus. So it stands there in Kibbutz Ginosar. And when you come there, you'll say, now, look, I can't tell you that Jesus was on that boat, but I can tell you that that boat was in the time of Jesus.
He described the common bond of Jews and Christians grounded in the land of the Bible.
These are real places. They speak to you and they speak to us. We came back to the land of Israel and realized the dreams of the prophets, of the ingathering of the exiles. I'm glad I have the opportunity, the privilege really, of coming to Africa to meet you. We have no better friends in the world, none. We appreciate this friendship, and we're expanding it into the continent of Africa. Israel is coming back to Africa. Africa is coming back to Israel. We want to see Africa be the success story that it can be, and we want to be part of it in everything, in water, in agriculture, in dairy production. And we are eager to share all of this with our African friends.
He also described the dismal situation for Christians in the Middle East.
And in the Middle East today, unfortunately, the attitude towards Christians and Christianity is not a good one. You see what is happening with Daesh in Iraq, what is happening to Christian communities and to the Yazidis and to others. There is one place in the Middle East where the Christian community is not only not shrinking, it's thriving and expanding, and it's safe, and it's welcome, and that place is Israel. You are welcome in Israel.
At the end of the meeting, the Christian leaders presented Netanyahu with a gift.
It's the Lion of Judah.
As Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, Israel stands ready to provide Africa with all the benefits of its groundbreaking technologies, including in the area of agriculture. Here's part one of a story by Gordon Robertson from the award-winning series Made in Israel on some of Israel's agricultural innovations.
In 1867, Mark Twain toured the land of Israel, known back then as Palestine. Here's how he described it: a desolate country whose soil is rich enough, but is given over wholly to weeds, a silent, mournful expanse. There was hardly a tree or a shrub anywhere. Palestine sits in sackcloth and ashes, desolate and unlovely. Today, Mark Twain wouldn't even recognize this land. Out of rocky soil, out of swamps, and even out of deserts, Israelis have created gardens, vineyards, and farms with some of the most innovative techniques in the world.
It was just this country with incredible dynamism and energy and excitement and food and people and a sense of family and ultimately a sense of belonging.
It's been said that the modern state of Israel was born on the kibbutz. So it's only natural that much of Israel's innovation was born there as well.
The kibbutz is the cornerstone in a lot of ways of a lot of things in Israeli society.
People came back wanting to create a collective and an equal society. And these kibbutzim became a very, very effective way to defend the land, to start getting young people engaged in agriculture. Remember, Jews were forbidden in most countries of the world to actually own land or to work the land. Jews couldn't be farmers. To all of a sudden see a generation of Jews farming the land in a collective environment, it was incredible.
Before Israel even became a state, Jews by the thousands came to live there on communal farms. But when they arrived in the Promised Land, it wasn't exactly flowing with milk and honey. The coastal plains were swampy, the Galilee and the Judean hills were rocky, and the southern half of the country was mostly desert.
Since the people of Israel left our homeland 2,000 years ago, the area was mismanaged. So we want to preserve and rehabilitate this holy land.
The early Jewish settlers faced a number of obstacles, from bad soil to Bedouin raiders, but they faced an even bigger enemy that threatened to destroy the Jewish state before it began. In the early decades of the 20th century, Israel was a breeding ground for mosquitoes carrying malaria. They overtook the coastal plains and the Jordan Valley, the only land available for Jews to buy since the local Arabs had decided it was uninhabitable. In 1920, more than a third of all Jewish residents of Palestine had malaria. So with no other choice, they went to work. They drained the swamps and sprayed the land, and changed the flow of water in irrigation canals to interrupt the mosquitoes' breeding. They were so successful that a commission from the League of Nations visited Palestine to learn what they did. Less than 20 years after Israel's statehood, the country was officially malaria-free. Once the threat of malaria was gone, Jewish settlers were free to focus on making the desert bloom. In the coastal plains, citrus groves replaced the swamps. And the Jordan Valley, once the center of the malaria epidemic, now became the country's breadbasket. The Negev desert blossomed with newly planted forests and vineyards. And the Arava, once the most arid part of Israel, became the site of a flourishing vegetable industry. All of this was accomplished in the first 20 years of Israel's statehood. In that time, they more than doubled their standard of living. And now they're using their experience to help other countries.
Up next, part two of the amazing agricultural innovations developed by Israelis that have become blessings to the world. Welcome back. Israel's innovations in agriculture have been a blessing and a boon to the world. Here's part two of Israel's advances in farming from CBN's award-winning series, Made in Israel.
In the 1970s, they created a new breed of cherry tomato that's disease-resistant and has a longer shelf life. They also bred a new kind of potato that can be grown in hot, dry climates and irrigated by salt water. These vegetables are now being grown in dry countries like Jordan, Egypt, and Morocco. Israeli scientists not only found ways to grow more crops, they also found new ways to preserve them. Grain Pro cocoons provide an inexpensive way for farmers to keep their grain market fresh by keeping out water, air, and insects. The Israeli cocoons are being used in Africa, the Far East, and even Pakistan, a nation with no diplomatic ties to Israel.
The kibbutz over time began to change. Israeli society began to change, became more capitalistic, became more focused on free enterprise and entrepreneurship and the individual taking responsibility for himself and therefore benefiting the overall society. There have been many very exciting companies that have been built in kibbutzim.
One of those companies is now doing business around the world.
If you went to the average Israeli 10, 12 years ago and said to them organic, they wouldn't have a clue what you were talking about. Here we've been doing organic farming for over 40 years.
Kibbutz Sde Eliyahu was founded by German refugees in 1934, and many of their early members were survivors of the Holocaust.
The biggest problem that we had when we started the organic was, what do you do if you're not using chemicals? How do you get rid of the pests?
Their answer was to fight bugs with more bugs.
Every single thing in nature has a natural enemy. What eats or what attacks these pests that are attacking our crops?
They started breeding different insects in the bomb shelter of the kibbutz. The idea was to breed predators to destroy the pests that ate their crops. The result was a new company called BioBee.
We went to the Israeli farmers. We said, "You want to buy some bugs?" They said, "What are you, crazy? We don't have enough bugs in the field. You want us to buy bugs?"
Eventually, they won over farmers in Israel and in 32 other countries as well. In California, 60% of the strawberry fields are treated with products from BioBee. The company also found a way to deal with one of the region's most devastating insects, the Mediterranean fruit fly.
We take the males of the species and we sterilize them. And then we release the sterile males into the environment. There's no future generation. And slowly, slowly, we lower the population without using harmful chemicals.
They also solved another agricultural problem: how to pollinate greenhouse plants.
The classic example we like to give is tomato plants. Tomato plants in nature, in the fields, are pollinated by the wind. In Israel, the majority of our tomatoes are not grown in the fields, they're grown in greenhouses. And in greenhouse, in a climate-controlled environment, you don't have that wind, you don't have the natural pollination. We had to find other methods of pollination.
Their solution was to breed bumblebees.
They collect pollen for food. They have to go and work even in cold weather conditions. They don't have stores of honey in the hive. They have to go and work. We're saving the farmer money because instead of paying people, the bees are doing the work. And the bees, unlike people, they don't miss a single flower. So once the farmers started using the bees for pollination, the yield of the tomato crops increased by 25%. In Hebrew we say, Ma rabu ma'aseh Elokim, how great and wonderful are creations, God. And this really shows that every single thing has a reason. There's a purpose for everything, these tiny little things, and look how much good they do for us, for the world, for the farmers, for the environment. It's really, really amazing.
Farmers at Sde Eliyahu not only targeted insects, they also found a creative way to get rid of rodents as well.
What we used to do is basically used to take poison in a bottle, in a teaspoon, and somebody's job was to walk up and down the rows, and every time they saw a mouse hole, to take a teaspoon of poison and throw it down the hole. Now, obviously that's not ecologically friendly. On top of that, if it rains or if we irrigate our fields, all that poison's going in the ground. So we said, what is a natural solution to rodents? And the natural solution that we found is the barn owl. The barn owl is an amazing raptor. 2 owls can capture an average of 2,000 to 5,000 mice a year. Okay, that's a lot of rodents.
There was just one problem with the owls.
they fly away. And one of the places they would fly to is Jordan, which is very close by. In Jordan, they were shooting them. In Arab folklore, the barn owl is a harbinger of death. And they're very superstitious about barn owls. So they see a barn owl, they shoot it. So very simply, we went to Jordan and we invited the Jordanian farmers to come to Steliao to see what we were doing here. This was over 20 years ago. And today we have over 2,600 nesting boxes across the country. The numbers keep growing. But also it's become a wonderful program of regional cooperation, also with Jordan, also with the Palestinian Authority. This has been amazing, amazing success story. We tell the people it's not the dove bringing peace anymore to the Middle East, it's the barn owl. We're a light unto the nations, we're supposed to be anyways. If we want to really save the environment, if we really want to help the world, then we can't keep these things to ourselves. We have to share these things. We have to share this knowledge. And I think by helping others, we're helping ourselves as well.
Up next, find out what's happening to Christians in the Middle East and what can be done to help them when we come back. Welcome back. When Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with Christians in Kenya, he noted the awful persecution of Christians in the Middle East. Recently, we talked with David Barton, the founder of Wall Builders, and what he's doing to help suffering believers in the region. How would you describe the situation for Christians here in the Middle East?
The situation for Christian Middle East is really critical in many areas of the Middle East. We've had thriving Christian populations since the time of Christ in a number of areas, and while there was persecution in the first 3 centuries, it really kind of abated for a long time. It is now back with a ferocious force. It is so much so that even the U.S. Congress, former Congressman Frank Wolf, was able to get a genocide declaration resolution through the House. So America has finally acknowledged what the rest of the Middle East, and particularly Europe, has seen, and that is there's a genocide going against Christians. We have communities in the Middle East that have existed since the time of Christ that are now extinct.
And so what is being done to help them?
What we're seeing is, for example, one of the charities I work with called Mercury One, we're taking those that need asylum, those that need to be protected, their lives have to be saved, and moving them to countries. And right now, Europe is willing to help with that. But the pulpits in America have largely been silent on this issue of their fellow brethren around the world. Worked with George Barna on a poll here a few months back, and in going through that poll, we took Bible-believing Christians and said, what do you need to hear from the pulpit? What's really important that you hear? Number 2 on the list, with 86% of Christians saying it's critical that I hear this from the pulpit, 86% said religious persecution. When you get over to pastors and you ask them, what is it you preach about in these 150 topics? Persecution didn't make the list.
How successful is the program that you're working on right now?
The program we're working on right now is very successful, but it's also very limited. If we're going to move people into a foreign country, 2 things we don't want to happen. We don't want them to be a security risk for that country. If we're going to move them in, we don't want them to turn out being terrorists. Well, and the other thing is we don't want to put a burden on their social programs. So as we move these people into the nations we're moving them, for example, we'll give 2 years' income for each of these families so they can get on their feet, they can learn the language, they can assimilate, become part of that culture, and the government therefore is not having to bear the burden of that.
And how would you describe what's happening historically right now?
Well, after World War II, they said never again, but that's because they remembered what happened in World War II. You look at where we are in America today, and starting back in September of 2014, when the new history standards came out for the AP U.S. history test that's given every year, you look at those 142 pages of standards, there is no mention of the Holocaust, there is no mention of World War II, there is no D-Day, there was not even a mention of Hitler. And these are the current standards we're teaching to the brightest history kids in America. So that's why never again doesn't mean anything now, because they don't even know what World War II is. But for those who lived through it and saw what Eisenhower did when he made the German community come see what was in those boxcars and in those ovens, I mean, those people who saw it and saw images of it, never again.
So what would be your message to the American church right now?
American church needs to get informed, see what you can do to help.
Coming up, see what some expect might become one of the major biblical attractions in the United States when we come back. Welcome back to Jerusalem Dateline. We're here in Israel, the land of the Bible, but over in the United States, a life-size replica of Noah's Ark is finally open to the public. And officials at the attraction held a ribbon-cutting ceremony to highlight their massive achievement. Mark Martin has the highlights.
On behalf of the city of Williamstown and the state of Kentucky, I would like to officially declare the Ark Encounter open.
The replica of Noah's Ark is the closest in size to the legendary ship, built before the flood as chronicled in the book of Genesis. The 510-foot long, 85-foot wide, and 51-foot high vessel is part of a new $100 million theme park called Ark Encounter. The founder of the Creation Museum, Ken Ham, had the massive ark built according to the dimensions recorded in the Bible. He quoted Psalm 106:1 during the ribbon-cutting ceremony.
"Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good." I do give thanks to the Lord. And that's why we played the names of God. We give all glory and honor to the God who created all things.
Kentucky's Lieutenant Governor Janine Hampton also spoke at the ceremony.
I just feel so blessed to just be a part of this. I think God is here today, and even if it rains, that is okay.
Ham told ABC News the Ark Encounter is making the Bible come alive. He said building Noah's Ark shows this really happened. This is plausible. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, leaders with Ham's organization Answers in Genesis and Ark Encounter also laid 12 stones, following the example of Joshua in the Bible.
He led the people of Israel across the Jordan River, normally fast-flowing river. It was a miracle of God. And then God told them to take 12 stones and to build a memorial as a reminder so that the coming generations would not forget who God is, and to also be a reminder to the world.
Ham says the ark was built as a reminder, a symbol of the 12 stones, reminding future generations of the truth of God's Word and the Gospel. Mark Martin, CBN News.
That is an amazing story. If you'd like to know more, go to our website, cbnnews.com. And when you're there, you can also see a new 10-part documentary series called Jerusalem, produced by author and historian Hannah Dembintu Harland. It deals with issues from radical Islam to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Be sure to check that out. Well, that's it for this edition. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.